Hi, this is just a welcome to all new incoming students into the department. My name is Dr. Samuel Fairlamb and I'm one of the social psychologists that we have here at Royal Holloway. Moreover, I'm also a teaching focused staff member, so a lot of the sort of social psychology that you will encounter in your degree will actually be taught by myself. In particular, I actually also module the first year course Understanding Individuals and Groups, which should provide you an introductory understanding to social psychology and some of the core concepts that social psychologists appeal to. In particular, in social psychology, what we focus on is the idea about how others can influence our attitudes and behaviors. And when we mean by the idea of others influencing our attitudes and behaviors, we can think about this from a kind of proximal perspective, where we think about how the actual presence of other people influences how we behave. But we can also think about how people constantly shape our attitudes and behaviors, even when they're not around us, through an indirect, implied, or imagined presence. So, for example, when we ever think to ourselves, what would this person think of me if I did this? That is a good example of how people are continuously shaping our attitudes and our behaviors despite not being around us at that point in time. So social psychology has quite a wide ranging scope of how it understands human beings and how it can understand the behaviors and attitudes that we have. In particular, in social psychology, what we will learn, and I've listed a few on the board here, quite a few topics that we will come across. Some of them on this board pertain to year one courses such as attitudes, aggression, and conformity. Some of them relate to topics that you might come across later on in your degree. And of course, some of these topics in year one sort of return in years 2 and 3 in slightly different guises where we start to become more complex with our thinking. So for example, with attitudes, later on in your degree, you might start focusing in on specific types of attitudes, such as having pro-environmental ones or having prejudicial attitudes, and trying to understand, for example, what influences people's attitudes in those particular domains. There are a whole host of topics, more than I could talk about today, just a few others to pick up on. The idea of conformity is very, very important to social psychology. As I mentioned, people often influence our attitudes and behaviors, and we like to conform to societal expectations of us. So conformity is a really important topic, something perhaps that's kind of ongoing a little bit in the pandemic as well, as we start to kind of conform to new social norms of social distancing, for example. So there's a sort of interesting social psychological experiment going on right now as people start to adopt new normative behaviors in light of the current crisis. Of course, as I said, as you pertain throughout your degree, we'll start to pick up on these ideas in slightly different forms. So for example, later on in your degree, you'll learn about obedience, which is a slightly different type of conformity and compliance. And particularly you'll learn about Milgram's research, his very famous shock experiments that looked at whether people would obey giving out punishments. There are lots of other topics within social psychology as well. We could also look at things like leadership. For example, what makes an effective leader? What kind of leaders are ones that can rouse the public, instill confidence and inspire? What leaders are most influential? And in some ways that kind of harks back to the idea of conformity as well. Which leaders are most likely to achieve compliance and achieve people to follow norms that they try to espouse? So there are many, many topics that you will learn within your degree, and I really hope that you look forward to starting to learn about these topics. You can obviously get a head start by looking at the social psychology textbook that we use for a large part of the degree, which is the Hogg and Vaughan textbook. You can look at that online. You can buy it from Amazon, or alternatively you can wait until you have access to our online resources where you can read it for free. Anyway, that's it from me for now. I look forward to teaching you in October when we start, and hopefully not just online, but in face-to-face. Okay, thank you. Stay safe.